It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind that made the golden leaves crunch underfoot and the chill wind creep through sweaters. Emily stood in the kitchen of her new home, nervously double-checking the slow cooker. The smell of rosemary chicken filled the air, and for once, everything seemed to be going according to plan. Today was a big day. Her fiancé's mother, Margaret, was visiting for the first time. Margaret was difficult, a retired school principal with sharp eyes and sharper words. She didn't believe anyone was good enough for her son, especially not a woman like Emily, a freelance illustrator who worked from home and drank oat milk. In Margaret's mind, Emily was a modern-day hippie with no real career, no structure, and certainly no business marrying her only child, Thomas. But Thomas insisted. "She just needs to get to know you," he said, rubbing Emily's shoulders. "Once she sees what you've done with the place, how thoughtful you are, she'll come around." Emily wasn't so sure. At exactly 4 p.m., the doorbell rang. Punctual, of course. She opened the door to find Margaret standing there in a navy peacoat, lips pursed, holding a small potted orchid. "Housewarming gift," she said with no trace of warmth. Emily smiled and stepped aside. "Come in, Margaret. Dinner's almost ready." Margaret's eyes scanned the entryway, judging everything from the light fixture to the shoes neatly tucked by the wall. Emily led her to the living room, where soft jazz played from the Bluetooth speaker. "You do realize jazz is just chaotic noise, don't you?" Margaret remarked as she sat down, placing her handbag on the armrest like a throne. Emily ignored the jab and offered tea. They made polite conversation, well, strained conversation. Margaret pointed out the dust on the ceiling fan and asked why Emily didn't use real butter. Every moment felt like walking on a tightrope, but Emily held her ground. This evening was important. She wanted it to go well. Around 5:30 p.m., the doorbell rang again. Margaret looked up sharply. "Are you expecting someone else?" Emily frowned. "No." She walked to the door, puzzled, and opened it to find a man standing on the porch. Mid-50s, perhaps early 60s. Tall, immaculately dressed in a tailored black coat and crisp trousers. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back, and a subtle scent of expensive cologne followed him. "Good evening," he said with a slight smile. "I'm terribly sorry to intrude. My car broke down just up the hill. I was hoping to use a phone to call a mechanic. No signal out here." Emily hesitated for a moment. It was unusual, but something about him was disarming. He didn't look desperate, just out of place. "Of course," she said, stepping aside. "Come in. You can use the landline." From the living room, Margaret's voice carried. "Emily, who is it?" Before she could respond, the man stepped into view. The reaction was instant. Margaret stood up like she'd seen a ghost. Her eyes narrowed, jaw tight. "Who is this?" Emily quickly explained the situation, but Margaret wasn't listening. Her gaze drilled into the stranger like a dagger. "No, absolutely not. You don't bring strange men into your home during dinner. Emily, what are you thinking?" The man looked amused but polite. "Apologies, ma'am. I won't be long. Just need to make a quick call." But Margaret had already crossed the room. "No, I don't know you, and I don't care how you're dressed or how fancy your words are. You are not welcome here." Emily felt her face flush. "Margaret, please." "No," Margaret barked. "This is my son's home. I will not be made uncomfortable in it." There was a moment of stunned silence. The man raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Instead, he gave a slight nod to Emily. "I understand. Thank you for your kindness." He turned and walked out the door, disappearing into the evening fog. Emily stared after him, stunned. She closed the door quietly. "That was rude." Margaret sniffed. "Better rude than reckless. These days you never know who people really are." But Emily couldn't shake the feeling. There was something off, not about him but about Margaret's reaction. She'd seemed threatened, almost scared. Dinner was tense. Emily went through the motions, trying to act normal, but her mind was elsewhere, and she could tell Margaret was on edge too. She glanced at her phone often, her fingers twitchy, her mouth tight. Later that evening, After Margaret had left and Thomas had returned home from work, Emily relayed what had happened. He frowned. That's weird. You said he was tall, well-dressed. Yes. Looked like he belonged at a board meeting or something. Thomas pulled out his phone and scrolled for a few moments. Did he look like this? He turned the screen toward her. Emily's stomach dropped. It was him. I saw him in a magazine last month, Thomas said slowly. That's Charles Whitaker, CEO of Whitaker Holdings. He's worth over $100 million. Emily's eyes widened. What would someone like him be doing walking around our neighborhood? No idea, Thomas said. But now I'm really curious why your mother was so eager to kick him out. Emily sat back on the couch, the scent of rosemary still lingering in the air. Something didn't add up. Margaret had been hostile, too hostile. Not just rude. It was like she knew him, and she'd wanted him gone. Emily didn't sleep well that night. She kept replaying the man's face in her mind, Charles Whitaker. The name meant nothing to her personally, but the moment Thomas showed her his photo, she felt a strange chill. It wasn't just the coincidence of a multimillionaire CEO being randomly stranded in their quiet neighborhood. It was Margaret's reaction. That wasn't the reaction of someone simply being protective or snobbish. That was fear. The next morning, Emily made coffee and sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through article after article about Charles Whitaker. Born into wealth, inherited his father's shipping empire, known for ruthless business strategies and being notoriously private. No scandals, no criminal history, nothing shady on the surface, at least nothing public. But there was one detail that caught her attention. He'd been married. Once. A long time ago. To a woman named Helen M. Harper. The name sounded oddly familiar. Emily sat up straighter. Harper. Margaret's maiden name was Harper. She looked again. Married in 1985. Divorced in 1991. No photos. No public mention of why the marriage ended. No children. Emily's mind raced. Could it be a coincidence? Later that day, she brought it up gently to Thomas. Do you know anything about your mom's past relationships? Before your dad? Thomas shrugged. Not really. I mean, she was married once before Dad. It didn't last. She doesn't talk about it. Emily raised an eyebrow. Did she ever mention the guy's name? Nope. Just called it her mistake phase. Why? Emily hesitated. Because I think that man she kicked out yesterday might have been her ex-husband. Thomas stared at her. You think Charles Whitaker was married to my mother? Emily nodded slowly. Everything lines up. The timing, her last name, her reaction. Thomas looked skeptical at first, but the seed had been planted. The more they talked about it, the more it made sense, or at least seemed possible. It would also explain why she'd reacted so viscerally. Not out of snobbery, but recognition. Something had happened between them. Something she never wanted to face again. That evening, Emily decided she needed answers, not just out of curiosity, but because she sensed something wrong. Margaret had crossed a line, and whatever her past was, it was clearly still influencing her present. So she did something bold. She emailed Charles Whitaker. It took her a while to find the contact form buried on the official Whitaker Holdings website. She didn't even expect a response. But she typed it anyway, brief and respectful. Dear Mr. Whitaker, I believe we may have crossed paths recently when you stopped by my home seeking help with your vehicle. I want to extend my apologies for how you were treated. There is a possibility we may know someone in common, and I'd like to ask you a few private questions, if you're open to it. Sincerely, Emily Rowan. She hit send, then waited. She didn't tell Thomas. Not yet. Days passed. Life returned to normal, or at least pretended to. Margaret called to check in. But Emily noticed she avoided any mention of that evening. No questions about the man, no apology, not even a snide remark. It was as if she wanted to pretend it never happened. Until Friday afternoon. Emily opened her inbox and froze. There it was. A reply from Charles Whitaker. It was short, polite. Dear Emily, thank you for reaching out. I remember you and the evening quite clearly. If you have questions, I'd be open to meeting over coffee or a call. Discretion is appreciated. Let me know what works. Charles. Her heart pounded. Discretion. That word alone told her there was more to this story. She arranged to meet him at a small cafe just outside town the following morning. She didn't sleep much that night either. Thomas asked why she seemed restless, and she told him only half-truths. "I'm just thinking about your mom's visit." The next day was overcast, the sky heavy with unspoken things. Emily arrived early, dressed simply, nerves dancing beneath her skin. At exactly 9 a.m., he walked in, the same composed presence, the same calm expression. He ordered an espresso and joined her at a small corner table. "Emily," he said with a nod, "thank you for reaching out. I had a feeling you might." She swallowed. "I'm not sure how to begin." "Then let me," Charles said. "The woman in your home that night, her name is Margaret now, but she was Helen Harper when I married her." Emily nodded, pulse rising. He continued, "We were very young. She was ambitious. I was already being groomed to take over my father's business. First, we made a good team, but she had a darkness in her, ambition that eclipsed empathy." "What happened?" Emily asked. Charles looked out the window. "She did something unforgivable. To someone I loved." Emily leaned in, heart thudding. "Who?" "My sister," he said quietly. "Helen, or Margaret, as you know her, was threatened by anyone who had my attention. She didn't want family, didn't want children, only control. One day, she orchestrated a cruel manipulation. She framed my sister for something she didn't do. It cost my sister her job, her reputation, nearly her life." Emily blinked. "Why would she do that?" "Because I was going to leave her," he said. "And she knew I would go to my sister for help. She wanted to destroy every escape route." Emily sat back, stunned. "I divorced her the moment I found out. She changed her name, vanished. I never thought I'd see her again. Until I walked into your home and saw her face." Charles looked directly at her. "Tell me, Emily, does she know who I am now?" Emily shook her head. "No, she never asked. She just wanted you gone." He nodded, unsurprised. "She hasn't changed," he murmured. "But now you know what she's capable of." Emily stared at her coffee, suddenly cold. She didn't know what scared her more: the truth about Margaret's past, or the fact that this woman had inserted herself into their lives so deeply, so quietly, and was hiding something that dark beneath the surface. Emily didn't tell Thomas everything when she got home from the cafe. Not yet. She wanted to. She needed to. But there was something about Charles Whitaker's warning, the look in his eyes when he said, "Now you know what she's capable of," that had stuck with her. It echoed through her mind as she watched Thomas move around the kitchen that night, humming to himself, completely unaware. How do you tell someone their mother once tried to destroy another person's life? That she vanished from a marriage cloaked in manipulation and had somehow built a whole new identity? One that had crept into yours? Emily needed to be sure first. She needed proof. The next morning, she pulled out an old box of photos Thomas had given her when they first moved in together. Most of them were childhood snapshots, birthday parties, school plays, Christmas mornings, all framed by a seemingly normal upbringing. But Emily was looking for something different now, something off. And then she found it, a faded photo. Thomas, maybe 4 or 5 years old, standing in front of a lake with his mom. She was holding his hand, but looking away from the camera. It wasn't her expression that made Emily pause. It was the man in the background, far off, almost unnoticeable, except for the posture, the way he stood, a familiar silhouette. Could it be? She scanned the image again. The hair was darker, the frame leaner, but everything about the stance resembled Charles. Could that have been him? Watching, or being watched? Before she could overthink it, her phone buzzed. Margaret. Emily stared at the screen, thumb hovering. She picked up. "Hello, Emily." Margaret's voice was tight. "Are you busy?" "No, just at home." "Why?" "I want to stop by. I need to speak with you." Emily hesitated. "Is everything okay?" A long pause. "I think we need to talk about the other night." 20 minutes later, Margaret was standing in her living room again. Same sharp coat, same cold perfume. But this time, her composure was cracked, just slightly. She didn't sit down. Instead, she walked to the window and stared out, arms crossed. Emily said nothing, letting the silence press in. "I wasn't fair to you the other night," Margaret began. "I overreacted." "That's one way to put it," Emily replied calmly. Margaret's jaw twitched. "That man, the one you let in. I recognized him." Emily's heart thudded, but she kept her tone neutral. "I thought so. I didn't want to say it in front of you, or Thomas, but you should know. Charles Whittaker is not a man you want in your life." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Why's that?" Margaret turned, eyes hard. "Because he's dangerous. He destroys what he can't control. When I was young, he manipulated me, made me think I was loved, supported, and then tried to erase me when I stopped playing along." Emily kept her expression still. "That's not what he told me," she said softly. Margaret blinked. "Excuse me? I met with him. He told me about your past, your marriage, and what happened to his sister." Margaret's face darkened, the tension in the room thickening like smoke. "That man is lying," she hissed. "You think I'd do something like that to his sister? He's rewriting history to protect his image. He always has." Emily stood her ground. "Then why did you change your name?" Margaret didn't answer. "And why did you panic the moment you saw him?" Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Because some ghosts aren't meant to be resurrected, Emily. I rebuilt my life. I raised a son. I earned my peace. And now you, with your bleeding heart and nosy questions, are tearing open old wounds that were better left closed." Emily's voice stayed steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "You weren't just protecting your peace. You were hiding who you really were." Margaret took a step forward. "You don't know what you're playing with, girl," she whispered. "You think you're clever? That you've uncovered some grand mystery? Let me give you a bit of advice. Leave the past alone. For your sake. And for Thomas's." Emily swallowed. "Is that a threat?" Margaret didn't blink. "It's a warning." Later that evening, Thomas came home to find Emily sitting quietly on the couch, staring into the fireplace. "You okay?" he asked, leaning down to kiss her cheek. She nodded, but her mind was racing. She needed to tell him all of it. But timing was everything now. The look Margaret had given her, that venom just beneath the surface, made it clear. They were past politeness now. This wasn't just about family secrets. It was about control. Emily was being warned. But she wasn't the kind of woman to back down. That night, she began searching again, not just for old photos, but for public records. Marriage certificates, court filings, anything with Margaret's name attached to Charles's. She found a mention in a 1986 real estate article. A house purchased jointly under Charles Whittaker and Helen M. Whittaker, née Harper. Then she found something else. A sealed court document in Connecticut from 1991. The year they divorced. Marked confidential. Unavailable to the public. But the index file showed something chilling. Filed under Restraining Order Emergency Filing. Emily's breath caught. She sat back in her chair, suddenly aware of how quiet the house was around her. Why had Charles left that part out? Or had he? Maybe he didn't want to scare her. Maybe he thought the past was dead and buried. But Margaret, Helen, had found a way to crawl back from it. And she was already in their home, already part of their family. Emily closed her laptop and stood up, suddenly cold despite the fire. She had questions. Too many. But one thing was becoming crystal clear. Margaret hadn't come back into their lives by accident. She came with a purpose. And Emily had just become an obstacle. Emily didn't sleep that night. She lay beside Thomas, eyes open in the dark, listening to the house breathe around her. The faint hum of the fridge downstairs, the occasional creak of floorboards settling. Each sound more sinister than the last. The restraining order. Margaret's veiled threats. Charles's haunted silence. It all circled through her mind like vultures. She had unearthed something deep, something rotten, and now it was seeping into the foundation of their home. The next morning, she made a decision. She would tell Thomas. She waited until after breakfast, when the dishes were cleared and the quiet between them was natural, comforting. He was reading the news on his tablet. She reached out, gently closed the screen. "Thomas, there's something we need to talk about." He looked up, surprised by the gravity in her voice. She told him everything. From the moment Charles arrived on their doorstep to the email to the meeting at the cafe. She described his version of the story, the manipulation, the revenge, the sister. She told him about the photo, the restraining order. And finally, she told him what Margaret had said. "You don't know what you're playing with." Thomas sat in stunned silence for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he exhaled. "I always knew she was intense," he said slowly. "Controlling, cold. But this, I had no idea." Emily reached for his hand. "Do you believe me?" He nodded. "I do. But I don't know what to do with it." "What do we do?" Emily hesitated. "We stay calm. We document everything. And we don't let her manipulate us." Thomas squeezed her hand. "She's going to deny it all." "I know." He stood, pacing. "And if she really is dangerous, then we have to protect ourselves." Emily's eyes followed him. "That's why I want us to set boundaries. No more surprise visits. No more coming in uninvited. She's crossed too many lines." Thomas agreed. They needed space. But space, they soon learned, wasn't enough. 2 days later, strange things began happening. Emily returned from work to find their back gate wide open. They never used the back gate. It was always locked. She asked Thomas. He hadn't touched it. The next night, they both heard it. A loud bang at 3 a.m., like something falling upstairs. But when Thomas checked, nothing had moved. "Maybe it was just the wind," he said. Emily stared out the window. The wind was still. Then, their mail started going missing. Packages arrived already opened. One envelope was torn in half, and a card from her sister was gone entirely. The final straw came when Emily found muddy footprints in the guest room. The same room Charles had waited in the night Margaret kicked him out. The windows were closed. The door had been locked. But someone had been there. Emily took photos. Every footprint. Every scrap of disturbed carpet. That night, she told Thomas, "I think she's watching us. Maybe even coming into the house." His face paled. "But how?" Emily remembered something Margaret once said. Offhand, during their first week in the house, "Oh, you haven't found the crawl space yet? This house has some charming secrets." She never thought anything of it. Until now. The next morning, Thomas called in a contractor friend. They searched the attic and found it. A narrow, unfinished crawl space that ran along the perimeter of the second floor. Barely wide enough to squeeze through. Inside, they found something chilling. An old chair, a mug with lipstick on the rim, a small flashlight, and a pair of earbuds, one still flickering with low battery. Emily stood in the hallway, staring into the dark opening above her head. "She was in here," she whispered. "Listening." The violation was total. They filed a police report, changed the locks, installed security cameras. But the damage was done. Trust had been shattered, and fear had settled like dust over every surface. 3 days passed with no contact from Margaret. Then, on Saturday, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. Emily opened it with shaking hands. "Emily, you don't know what you've done. You've torn open something I spent a lifetime sealing away. You think you're protecting Thomas? You're exposing him to things he doesn't need to carry. I walked away from Charles for a reason. I took my son with me because I was trying to keep him safe. Now you've made it your mission to ruin that. Be careful what else you dig up. Some truths don't set you free. They bury you. M." Emily read the note twice, then once more. No apology. No denial. Just menace. She handed it to Thomas. He read it silently, then said, "We need to talk to Charles again." They met at the same cafe the next morning. This time, Charles was less calm, more watchful, like a man who'd been waiting for the storm to start. "She's already begun, hasn't she?" he asked the moment they sat down. Emily nodded. Charles sighed. "I hoped this wouldn't reach you, but I knew better. She's been in our house, Emily said quietly. Inside the walls. Charles's jaw clenched. She's always been clever and persistent, but when she feels cornered, she lashes out. Thomas leaned forward. Why did she take me? Charles's eyes softened. Because she knew I wouldn't fight. She told the courts I was abusive, fabricated it so convincingly I couldn't prove otherwise. I had no grounds, no rights. Emily whispered. And you let her go? I had no choice, he replied. But I watched from a distance, for a while, until I realized she was keeping you away to hurt me, not to help you. Then I stopped. Thomas sat back, shaken. Charles continued. But I never forgot. And when I saw her again in your home, I knew she hadn't changed, only buried the monster deeper. Emily looked at him. What do we do now? Charles's answer was quiet and firm. You prepare, because she's not done. That night, Emily and Thomas sat together, the silence between them heavy. Everything had changed. What had started as a rude guest being kicked out had spiraled into something much darker, a life unmasking itself piece by piece. Margaret or Helen wasn't just difficult. She was dangerous and desperate. Emily looked at Thomas. Whatever comes next, we face it together. He nodded, eyes steady. But in the hallway, beneath the quiet hum of the heater, something shifted. A soft creak. From behind the wall, the sound came again. A creak, then silence. Emily held her breath, every hair on her body rising. Thomas stood up, his face pale, listening. It's the wall, he whispered. They followed the sound down the hallway, toward the guest room. The very room where Charles had waited. The room where footprints had once appeared without explanation. Now, as they stood outside the door, they heard something else. A soft click, like a latch. Thomas opened the door slowly. Empty. But Emily walked past him, toward the far corner, toward the bookshelf Margaret had once commented on. So quaint, she'd said. Just like something my grandmother had. Emily ran her hand along the edges. Then she found it a groove, barely visible. Her fingers pressed in, and a quiet pop echoed. The wall shifted. A panel swung open. Behind it was a narrow corridor, dark, damp, with insulation pushed aside. A crawl space connecting the inner guts of the house. And at the very end of it, a flicker of light. They stared at each other. No words. Then, together, they stepped inside. The path was cramped and choking with dust. Cobwebs brushed their faces as they crawled. Emily led with her flashlight, hand trembling. After what felt like forever, the passage opened into a small, makeshift room. A chair, a blanket, a bottle of water, and in the far corner a stack of journals, labeled meticulously in Margaret's sharp handwriting. The first one read, Whitaker, Volume 1. Emily opened it, heart racing. The contents chilled her. Every page was filled with obsessive notes. Surveillance of Charles, his work, his home, even people he spoke to. Records of Thomas's childhood friends. Emily's background. Her old job. Her college roommates. She's been documenting our lives, Emily whispered. Thomas stared, horrified. What is this? Then they heard it. Footsteps. Above them. Then on the stairs. Then her voice. Margaret. Calling softly. Thomas? Emily? Are you here? Emily's blood ran cold. She flicked off the light. The house was silent again. Thomas whispered, We have to go. But as they turned, they heard the bookshelf above groan open. Light poured into the tunnel, and there stood Margaret, framed by the hallway, calm, still, dressed impeccably, a leather-bound book in one hand, a kitchen knife in the other. You weren't supposed to find this, she said, voice trembling with controlled fury. You were supposed to stop digging. Thomas stepped in front of Emily. What is all this, Mom? Margaret's gaze flickered. Protection. From him. From people like her. Emily spoke, quiet but firm. From Charles? Or from the truth? Margaret's face cracked. You think I'm a monster, she said. But you don't know what he did to me. You don't know what it's like to be made invisible. To scream and be unheard. She stepped forward. He ruined me. He took everything. My family. My name. I had to disappear. I had to rewrite my story. I made a life. I gave you everything, Thomas. Her voice was breaking now. I built this. All of it. And then she brings him into our house? Smiles at him like he's done nothing? Don't you see? He's trying to turn you against me. No one did that, Thomas said. You did. Margaret froze, and for the first time, looked lost. The police arrived within the hour. Emily had managed to hit the silent alarm in the crawlspace, a feature she'd installed after finding the footprints. Margaret didn't resist when they arrived. She just stood in the hallway, still clutching the book, the knife now on the floor. The journals were taken in as evidence. The restraining order Charles filed years ago was reopened. Margaret, or Helen, was placed under psychiatric evaluation after an emotional breakdown during questioning. And just like that, she was gone from their lives. Weeks passed. The house was quiet again. Emily and Thomas redecorated the guest room, removed the bookshelf entirely, sealed the crawl space shut. Charles visited one more time just to make sure they were okay. She was always brilliant, he told Emily as they walked the garden. Too brilliant. But when she felt the world turn on her, she snapped. And she never came back. Emily asked, "Do you think she really loved Thomas?" Charles looked toward the house, where Thomas stood watching them. "I think that was the only thing she ever did love," he said softly. "But even love can twist. And some people never untwist again." 1 month later, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a single photo. Emily and Thomas on their wedding day. On the back, scrawled in Margaret's familiar handwriting, "I watched you bloom. I only wanted to keep you from withering. Nothing else." Emily burned it that night, and for the first time in a long time, she slept. What began as an awkward evening, a mother-in-law kicking out a guest, ended in the unraveling of a life built on lies, surveillance, and fear. Emily learned that love can wear many masks, and some, when pulled away, reveal the kind of darkness that hides behind politeness and pearls. But in the end, truth always knocks. And this time, it knocked loud enough to